Hey everybody, welcome to this special edition of React Native Radio, co-hosted by Peter Pikarczyk and Gant Laborde. Today on our panel we have Lee Johnson.
What's up?
And our special guest today is Vincent Riemer.
How's it going?
So, Vincent, how'd you get into programming?
So, I actually probably started a little bit later, at least than most of the people I know. My first getting into it was senior year in high school. There was an AP Java class, and I took that. I was already really into computers, but I had never really gotten into programming at the time, and I just figured that would be a good avenue. And it was a blast. It made so much sense. It was really cool to just build stuff, and from there I decided to go into school for computer science, and rest is sort of just going from there.
Man, that's AP Computer Science actually turned me off from coding.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess I took it sophomore year of high school, and it was also Java, and I hated it. Like, I was like, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. And that actually turned me off from coding for a little while. And that's when I focused on design for a few years before jumping back into programming. So it's funny that you liked it, so much more, and I hated it.
I think the teacher is really where it comes down to. Like, if you have a good teacher, it just makes it so much better. Because I've had programming classes that I've hated, but it's generally just because the teacher wasn't that great. And in high school, it was like, this was the sort of guy where you'd ask like a simple question, and then he'd start, going off on like the whole history behind why the programming, like why that decision was made. And it was crazy. You could learn just so much from the guy.
Yeah, well, you might just explain why Peter hated it. Just tell me the answer.
Could be.
My teacher was our AP math teacher, so I had him in there too. And so I just it was tough. And sometimes he would, I'd be like, I remember to this day, times where I'd be like, hey, I don't understand this for loop. And he'd stare at it intensely and just swear, under his breath. He's like, why can't I get this? So maybe that has something to do with it.
That's the funniest thing, though. That's the thing with math, is that it's only useful and interesting if you get it. And I think that's what really is interesting, is for a long time it doesn't click. And then you have some people like Vincent. Apparently, one day you look at it and you're like, oh, man, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then have you been hooked ever since then? Or did you ever have a burnout moment, Vincent?
I'd say so I really enjoyed it, or I could see myself doing that in the future. But the real sort of deep passion and doing stuff like side projects and stuff didn't actually really start until maybe the second half of senior year in college. So it was more like, I understand this is kind of cool, but I wasn't, going out of my way, outside of just required schoolwork until that later portion in college. And it was a little frustrating because, you look at your peers in college working on some really cool stuff on the side, and just sort of wondering, asking yourself, why am I not doing this? I don't have any ideas, but what's the difference between them and me? And I still don't know the answer to that, but it just sort of happened.
Yeah, that's inspiring. I think that there's a lot of people who sometimes they feel exactly that way. Measured by their peers, and then you never actually know what the answer is. Was there a series of things that really started to put you on a path to be passionate about it, or?
I mean, I'd say I don't remember exactly the first project that I sort of came up with and started tinkering on, but sort of realizing that every day, especially in computers, we experience little annoyances and what have you. And the realization that, like, being somebody who knows programming, realizing that you can actually fix it was huge. It is like, you couldn't, once you have that mindset of like, oh, there's a little annoyance, sort of instantly going to that, oh, well, like, that's just how it is, to, oh, I can do something about this. I think that's where the jump came. And then after that, it was just side project city.
Nice. Then you felt empowered. That's amazing. How long have you been doing this professionally? You just went all the way through college?
Yeah, and I'm about like a little over 3 years out of school.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's 5, 8. I've been programming 8 years, I guess.
Were you ever nervous about releasing your stuff to the world? You know, having everybody see your code on GitHub?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I'm still scared about that. Like, you know, for the most part, you have private repos on Bitbucket, GitLab, and that's sort of a safe space to put your code. But like, even before I realized that, it was sort of, you know, putting the stuff up on GitHub, but just, you know, not adding a README and not promoting it was enough to sort of just ensure that, oh yeah, nobody's going to actually look at this. It's basically as good as making a private repo.
I mean, he's right.
But the README just say, please go away.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if you do that, people are going to be interested on what it is.
True. See, Vincent knows the secret here.
Well, this is more in the incognito GitHub world.
Right. Instead, what you need is some poorly formatted and written README that's about a mile long of text with no GIFs or images in it whatsoever. That will immediately make sure nobody looks at it.
And you never have to pay for a GitHub account. See, that's really smart.
Yeah, and just name it something like really, like, generate one of those long passwords with gibberish in it and just make the project that.
That's not hard. I think that's every JavaScript developer's talent, is just poorly naming things right off the bat.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, cool. Well, I have a quick question before we get real deep into a lot of your recent stuff. One of the first things I saw that you posted out there was the drum machine, the 808.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm a side musician as well. So how did that play into, like, when did you start playing with music, and then how did that transfer into your programming?
So I started probably like producing music and DJing junior year in college. And it was just, you know, I had started listening to electronic music when I sort of arrived in college, and it got to a point where like, oh, this can't be that hard, right? But that's definitely not true. And my dad produces music, but more like recording music. So it was sort of, I was brought up in that world. And I think it was actually the summer after college. There's this I was really trying to learn synthesis, just trying to learn the basics, because I felt like I was not really getting anywhere just by the fiddling around. I wanted to learn some of the underlying principles behind synthesis. And there's this amazing, set of articles by Sound on Sound called Synth Secrets, which it's crazy long, and it's actually pretty old at this point, but it's just so in depth. And there was a section towards the middle that was like, okay, we're going to talk about the sort of strategy or like history of the strategies of doing like a bass drum in a synthesizer. And they started going over how the 808 and the 909 did their kick drum synthesis, and, you know, gave you the block diagrams of the synthesis chain. And when I read that, I also started looking into something like the web audio API. And I saw sort of all those primitives that were explained in the Sound on Sound article sort of were provided by the web audio API, and you could reconstruct those block diagrams. So I started just doing that kick drum, and then I was like, oh, what if I could do this for every sound in the 808? And I got most of the way there in that summer, but it was just this little like jQuery, like a few buttons that you could press and it would make the sound. And then it wasn't like, I sort of dropped the project like for a year or two. And then I was at the time getting like really into React, and I built like a couple just sort of small toys for myself while trying to learn it. And then I sort of sat down and said, okay, I want to do like a big project that I'm going to release. What can I do? And I thought back to this sound synthesis thing with the 808. And I'm like, oh, what if I could just build like super accurate UI to the original? Because I figured like this had been done before, making a web-based 808, but everything was always like extremely simplified, because the 808 is not actually like the original device was not easy to use. It was very much for just pure producers, and because they're really hard to get nowadays, people don't may understand the history of the device, but you really can't know what it was like to use it. So that sort of became my mission, was I'm gonna try to faithfully recreate all the logic, the sequencing for it, and look as close to the original as possible. And that's sort of what was going to differentiate it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so cool, is that it actually looks like an old board, and it sounds really, really good. Actually, I had headphones on when I played with it. It sounded amazing.
It's freaking awesome. I originally was super interested in building a DAW, a digital audio workstation, in the browser using React. That was my first company, quote unquote, that I tried building when I left Trunk Club. And I spoke about the web audio API and the MIDI API at React Rally in 2015, but then just sort of found another business avenue, I guess, and completely abandoned it. I love all that stuff. That's why I was particularly excited about having you on the show, Vincent, because I've been using Ableton for I don't know since 2010. Music synthesis has just been a huge part of my life. I love the Moog sub 37. It's one of my favorite synths. I start playing it and forget about time and space and just look up and it's 4 hours later. So I'm a huge fan of synthesis as well.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun, especially really getting into the guts. At this point, I've gone down the whole modular synthesizer route. I really like that sort of patching things together in sort of not expected ways and getting really weird results out of it. And I personally I started with Ableton, but I've since moved to Bitwig is what I use, just because it gives you that sort of more modular style of creating devices and device chains.
Yeah, I was actually going to switch over to Bitwig. When I was really into it, Bitwig was in beta. It wasn't released yet.
Yeah.
And I've looked at it, every few months I take a look and I'm am I going to make the switch over? But still just kind of tinker around with Ableton. But I don't know, just Ableton has fixed so many of the issues that Bitwig was supposed to fix, I guess. That I just sort of said, maybe it's not worth switching yet. But perhaps you can sell me on that sometime outside of this recording.
I'm not a paid representative for Bitwig. I don't really Ableton is great.
Oh no, I get it. Yeah.
If you stick with it, it's all about just getting familiar with something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I thought I knew about music, but now I know I don't. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it. But what I figure that this might be a good transition into is what I think I might know about as well is definitely, I think one of the major reasons that you want to be on here is to talk about React Native DOM. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I might need you to help me with that. Maybe if you don't know it, that's okay. If Peter knows it or not. I was wondering, so the concept of bringing React Native and React together has been around for a while. First off, of course, with React Native Web, right, which I think was invented by one of the people we've had on this podcast before, a gentleman who works for Twitter. And the concept there was that you would write your web code as if you were in React Native, and then it would translate that over into views, into divs and items like that, so that there's sort of like this primitive that bases off of React Native. And then from there, I believe Leland Richardson came up with React primitives, which was another concept. If my timeline's incorrect, please feel free to interrupt me, because I don't know if this is true. So then Leland came up with React primitives. I don't know if he's still working on that at all. I think that React Native Web is still sort of progressing. And then the next time we see this concept introduced, I think, is with React XP, which sort of says, hey, everybody, this is a brand new thing all the way over here. I think it comes from the Skype team. And I know that Natter knows a lot more about React XP. I haven't touched it at all. As far as I can tell, a lot of people still cared then about React Native Web versus kind of having to worry about these new things. And then you did your talk at React Europe. I think you started working on this maybe 6 months ago or so? Or
it was around a year ago.
About a year ago. Nice. So you've gotten to see all these things kind of come out, and then you still said, no, I've got an awesome thing here. I'm going to keep working on it. And then you came out with React Native DOM. Is that sort of your recollection of how we've gotten here in the world of React Native devs?
Yeah, that sounds... Yeah, I think that's the timeline.
Yeah, and it seems to me this has been the biggest mover shaker since then. There's been, like I said, React Primitives, React XP, there's all these other things, but the one that people are actually stopping and paying attention to is React Native DOM. And so I guess in your own words, could you tell us all what it is and perhaps why you think that this solution is getting so much gravity compared to anything else before it?
Well, so it sort of started with, I started the project mainly in sort of a reaction to using React Native Web, just because I sort of imagined React Native Web working one way and then sort of discovering that it didn't. To me, React Native Web is like an API shim. It's basically every module and view is sort of implemented in React Native Web sort of on its own, and how you sort of do that translation of like taking your code and running it on the web is essentially you do a module rewrite, a module name alias from React Native Web to just React Native. And that idea was that it would just, it has the same API, so it would just work. And that, from a maintainability standpoint, that concerned me, because it's sort of like every new core module that gets added in core view gets added. It's sort of like you don't get any of, because React Native is implemented. You don't get to leverage anything that exists from the sort of that original React Native implementation. So, and it was a mix of a lot of different other projects I had ideas for, but hadn't found the avenue to actually execute on them. Stuff like doing yoga layout on the web and running React in a web worker. Like, those were ideas I had before React Native DOM came around, or the idea of React Native DOM came around. And it sort of the project acted as an avenue to just do all these different ideas that I had in a single project. And I think that React Native DOM is making a splash, primarily just because its architecture is just so different from anything else framework-wise on the web, because it is multi-threaded and it's actually doing layout in userland. It's not just trying to give you the tools to arrange divs in the best possible way and in the easiest way. It's like actually abstracting just the entire DOM away from you and giving you APIs that just make a lot more sense. And having that sort of decoupled web worker sort of and main rendering thread separation allows me as the sort of framework developer to be a lot more confident in the abstractions, because I know what the user can sort of manipulate, because it has to go through my framework. Like, you can't sort of work around it because your code's running in a web worker. You can't touch the DOM. So I get to do a lot more sort of ambitious things on the rendering thread because I know that the user won't ever touch the DOM directly.
Wow, that's really good. And I see you did not implement the keep it secret by writing a terrible README plan that we had talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Maybe I could send you a PR for that.
Accept it.
If you want to go secret again, yeah, we can really help with that.
After this show, you have 3 PRs that just say remove README from Dan, Lee, and Peter.
We've transpiled your README into complete inreadability. Your repo is now private. So that's an adventure in and of itself. So you're relatively new into the field of professional programming. You've for graduating and going after this, and you're talking about how you had this sort of like secrecy with how you've had to go there, and then now where you're landing today, right? You're giving talks, which, by the way, a lot of people have trouble just doing that. You have an excellent README. You have an idea, and you say that this is worth sharing, right? Is there a lot between here and there, or was it self-discovery? Did somebody help you? Well, what's the story behind what gave you the willingness a year ago to say, hey, this is the best solution, and I'm going to go ahead and put it out there?
Well, it's weird. It's sort of like it didn't start off that way. It was sort of, so I had done the 808 and I had gotten invited to speak at React Amsterdam. And that was the first talk I ever gave. And sort of, I just never thought about speaking or giving talks. And after I did that, it was awesome. And I wanted to do it more. And sort of before, I was sort of wondering like, oh, I want to keep doing this, but how do I, come up with a new talk? And because that talk that I gave at React Amsterdam was just basically, oh, I built something cool, I'm going to talk about it. And it was really just in my search for something else that's cool that I could build that would be worthy of giving a talk about. That's sort of how it started, sort of searching for the idea. And I knew I wanted to do something because the IO808, while it's open source, you can look at the code. It's a consumer facing sort of not product, but an app, more or less a toy. And I wanted to try something more developer facing. So that's what started on the path of thinking about like, okay, what are the problems that I'm having in web development now, more specifically with React, and what sort of ideas can I come up with to try to help fix that? And and I started it off with no expectations that it would actually work. I was sort of like, this will be a fun exploration.
Nice.
who cares if it doesn't amount to anything? I'm probably going to learn a lot, especially about the sort of React Native's architecture and the internals of it. And that's value in and of itself. So for a good portion, probably at least 6 months of developing React Native DOM, I was still under that impression, like, I'm not sure if this is going to actually work. But I might as well just try because it seems interesting.
So I'm interested to hear about WebAssembly. I haven't played around it myself, but the idea of implementing or compiling down Yoga to work in the web is really interesting. Can you explain a little bit about how that all works?
So it's interesting because, I don't know if you're familiar with the history of Yoga. It was originally written by Christopher Shudo, and it was actually originally written in JavaScript. And then he did something where, if I remember correctly, it was like a regex-based transpilation to C++, and that's how it was running on the native platforms. And then after a certain point, they moved the project to C++ proper. And when I started the project, React Native DOM, Yoga actually had a sort of JS version. They were compiling it to ASM.js. And for at least half of my project's lifespan, that's what I was using, was the ASM.js version of Yoga that they just provide in the main repo. But I was getting the bundle sizes were just, I wasn't going to make them tiny. It was just not possible just with the amount of code involved with the project. But I was looking at that ASM.js sort of that bundle that just, it was contributing to the size. It was like 400 kilobytes on its own. And I was just sort of, I wanted an excuse to work with WebAssembly, and this just seems like the most obvious opportunity to do something in WebAssembly. So I had to sort of throw away their bindings and write my own, just because the library they were using for compiling to ASM.js didn't have a WebAssembly target, at least at the time. I haven't checked previously, but so I needed to write it in sort of EM script and EM bind, and then just compile that to WebAssembly, and then just integrate it into the project. Make the API calls to Yoga just a little bit different, but it was reasonably, it wasn't that difficult to make the switch.
Cool. So when you say, the bundle was big, like 400 kilobytes, what does WebAssembly do differently that either brings that number down or, just optimizes the performance of the application or loading time?
So it's it goes down to sort of, it's not exactly bytecode. And actually, honestly, I'm not that familiar with the internals of WebAssembly. And a lot of what I've done in React Native DOM, I sort of, when I hit a problem, I sort of try to understand it from a high level and what I would need to do to sort of bring all these pieces together. But unless there's a necessity, I sort of try to skim where I can, and WebAssembly is sort of, I'm getting more and more into it as I go on, because I have sort of, my vision is to move more and more of the project to WebAssembly. But it's more of a bytecode representation, or the instructions are a lot smaller than something like ASM.js, where ASM.js is JavaScript. It's actually backwards compatible. Even if a browser does not have an ASM.js sort of runtime, it could still run just on a pure JavaScript implementation. It just wouldn't run as fast. So having that sort of binary representation, I believe, is a big opportunity for sort of compression benefits and just size in general.
Nice. So, and I know you were saying that you're still looking into all this stuff too, but is there some special way the browser caches that file? Is it treated like differently on its own, where like, if you've already downloaded it, like you're not going to have to, does it become sort of like a installed package or a plugin in the browser? Anything like that happening behind the scenes? Just out of curiosity.
I think right now there isn't anything like that. I remember reading discussions in like some of the WebAssembly like specification repos where they are discussing something like that, but I haven't seen where that's gone. And right now it's sort of difficult, especially with the way I'm using WebAssembly, because it's sort of bundled in line with the JavaScript. It's like a raw array buffer in line in the JS. So it's a little bit difficult to do that, just because I had to do that just because really WebAssembly's interop story and sort of existence in the JavaScript ecosystem is like not as fleshed out as it could be. So you have to resort to little hacks every so often still with it. But it definitely has a promising future.
Yeah, I was curious. So what would you describe as the best use case for that React Native DOM would fit versus like React Native for web? Like what's the key type of application or reason for going one versus the other?
Well, I see it as, at least there's sort of, I'm wondering if you're thinking of like why you would go either which way, like right now as it stands, sort of like the implementation now, or sort of like the future.
I think both. Yeah, I think both. For people looking at it now, for people that are just, because some people want to go that route now to get the benefit, obviously, of reusable components for web and mobile, but then some people are just looking at that and are going to make the decision in 3 to 6 months. So I guess both are relevant.
Yeah, right now, I basically just say, like, go with React Native Web. It's like my project is still in sort of early stages. Like, yeah, I've been working on it for a year, but like, it's still just a side project, and it was really just only me. So there's only so much I can do. And there are still some like sort of unanswered questions with it. But in the future, I see it as, because the goal isn't just to like making it so that you can just have components that you've written and run in React Native and have them just be able to run on the web. That's actually the means to an end. That's sort of my theory, is that by making it so that just functionally and sort of with the same performance characteristics, you can, by matching React Native on those native platforms, it'll end up just being the best way to build sort of app-like applications, native-like applications on the web, getting that performance and the rich animations, transitions, or what have you. Because, I mean, at this point, there's really nothing else like it.
Yeah, and it's because of the closed box render where you can actually control those optimizations yourself. So is that a call for contributors? Are you looking for people to jump in and help push this thing?
Oh, definitely. It's a little bit, it's tough when it's not, your full-time job, and there's sort of the day-to-day maintaining stuff, just, adding new views and new modules that haven't been implemented yet. And then you have some of the bigger problems that need to be addressed. And I'd like to focus on those bigger problems. Like right now, I'm working on how text measurement is done and moving it away from actually measuring it in the DOM and moving it to a canvas-based text measurement system, just to eventually try to get to the point where I can do the layout in its own thread as opposed to actually needing to do it on the main thread.
Wow. Yeah. That's really impressive. It's only been a few contributors have joined in with you. I think it's like something around 5. Let me take a look. Yeah. So that's, wow. Is there any, so this is a good call to action. If somebody's looking Do you have some tickets labeled as good first ticket, things like that? People looking to really kind of write their name on the wall a little bit should probably hop in on this project, right?
Yeah, I don't have anything like that quite yet. Again, it's sort of like trying to balance the sort of administrative work of the project versus
right.
Actually progressing the project forward. And this is really the first big open source project that I've ever needed to actually do anything remotely close to maintaining. So it's a learning process.
Yeah, so that's been that's always a good hidden cost is a successful open source project. How have you been handling that? Has it been surprising? I saw you added the all contributors, which is a great thing, help share the credit and things like that. Any other points of wisdom for people who are maintaining projects and now you have to maintain it because it's successful and there are needs and issues, things like that? Any wisdom for us?
I mean, I wouldn't say that I've become a good maintainer yet. This is very much a work in progress for myself. But I mean, one thing that I'm still sort of struggling with and I need to get over is like I actually personally have trouble like closing an issue when or the question just isn't applicable or it's off topic or something like that. Like I personally just have a block. It's difficult for me to just do that close and being like, sorry, this isn't applicable. And I need to get over that. And I have one person who's sort of done some non-trivial contributions to the project, and I've brought him on as a collaborator, and he's done a good job of doing some of that cleanup. But I just almost making it just a little bit less personal in this maintainer's position. I'd say it's surprising where you sort of need to desensitize yourself just a bit to just be able to get it to move forward.
Yeah, I imagine we could fill an entire podcast with lessons learned in how to disconnect yourself from a community project.
Yeah, definitely.
In a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just like, I'm out. Good luck, everybody who is dumb enough to install.
Yeah. Don't drop the mic or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy. Yeah. No, that's really awesome. And I guess like if you could have some buy-in from maybe if there are any companies listening looking to, I guess the market is somebody who wants to circumvent the WPA or like somebody who wants to just build a mobile app and then also have that same service cleanly and clearly being able to be on the web.
Yeah, I mean, I just be aware that it's not production ready now, and I think sort of almost the production readiness the way I'm seeing it right now is that it's almost going to get like worse before it gets better.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, like the bundle size is an issue, and as it stands right now, it's likely going to get worse before it gets better. But that dip is necessary in just getting everything working so that it can be production ready in the future. And it's just tough, especially when it is not a full-time thing to actually be able to give like a timeline. It's just tough. I'm still, constantly learning every day about something new that, I need to implement because I'm more or less, sometimes it feels like I'm just actually building a browser on top of a browser. And there's a lot of stuff related like that you need to do in order to accomplish that. So
if it makes you feel better, it doesn't get any easier when it is full-time too.
Yeah.
The same problems are still there.
If it makes you feel any better, you're screwed either way.
It does make me feel better.
We appreciate your sacrifice. You were screwed either way.
Yes.
Now you do it because you love it, right? You started this thing because it was an interesting problem to solve and you got into it and you really enjoy it. And that's why you're doing it, man. And I think there are lots of guys out there listening that have the same interests, same area that they're interested in. And I think it's time for some community to step up and help you out, man.
Yeah. Be nice.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's really where creativity lives, is that you didn't know whether or not this was going to be something that was going to have thousands of stars, right? You started doing it for you and enriching yourself. And I think that, that's the kind of thing that is easy for the community to kind of get behind. And I'll probably cruise through and see if you have any low-hanging fruit tickets. Especially good people who do the all contributors and things like that. It's always fun to contribute back to places that are grateful for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, it sounds great. Let's go ahead and close up this podcast by getting to the usual picks. So, Peter, do you have any picks for today?
When you start a new project, typically you need things like a domain name, hosting, things like that. When I choose hosting, I pick mine for the options it gives. I like to know what I'm getting and set things up just how I like them. This is why, for your projects, you should check out Linode. Linode servers feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabyte network, and Intel E5 processors. That's all the power you need to run VMs under full control, or Docker containers, who doesn't love that, encrypted disks, and VPNs. Plus, they have 10 data centers across the world and add-ons like backups, Node Balancer, and Longview to help you control your server costs. They also offer block storage for your static files, and you can get started with a $20 credit if you use the code react_native2018. That credit is good for 4 months on their 1 gigabyte server. That's a lot of time to try them out and see if they're the right fit for you. That code again is react_native2018. Also, if you're interested in working for Linode, they're hiring. Head to linode.com/careers to see their available positions.
My one special pick for the next couple of weeks will be JS Camp Chicago. It's Chicago's first JavaScript conference happening September 22nd. Our CFP closes July 4th. So I'd really encourage all of you, whether you've spoken at conferences before, whether you haven't, to apply. We're doing something special and having half of our speakers be local Chicagoans. We've had such a fragmented community here, if you can call it a community at all. And we're really trying to take a grassroots effort to rebuild the JavaScript scene here and starting with a community-driven conference. You can learn more at chicagojs.org.
That's awesome. Chicagoans, I didn't even know that was a word, but now I do.
Hopefully it's a word.
Also, I have to say, why are all the conferences in September? I would be there, Peter. I would be there with you if you didn't choose the month where I'm already traveling to 2 other conferences in Europe. You have to talk to us better next year.
Yeah. It was tough choosing a time. I actually made a list of every single conference that's taking place. And I mean, it was either going to compete against US conferences or Europe one. So we just had to make that hard decision. And Chicago Ember's happening the night before. So we kind of wanted to do something. It was sort of like a back-to-back thing we wanted to do together. So originally it was supposed to be a week later. But yeah, it's unfortunate because there's so many conferences now. We kind of did the best we could with a date. Sorry.
That's it's a great opportunity, and I'm sure that I will clear my schedule to see that next year. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I've been looking for an excuse to go to Chicago. So now everybody has.
Next year's conference is actually going to be awesome. So this one's sort of like a little trial run. Let's see what the community thinks. And next year's is going to be something really incredible that I can't wait to share with you all.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Awesome. All right, Lee, do you have any picks?
Cool, yeah, I'll have 2 things. First, I'll follow the conference thing, and I'm sure Gant knows a lot about this, but Chris and I from G2I will be at Chain React, and we'll be hosting an after party, so come hang out with us there. Yeah, they're coming up quick. It's we're almost there. So
23 days.
Yeah, it's coming up, so it'll be fun. We're going to get some local beer, just hang out, have a few drinks, meet some people. It'll be cool. And then the other thing is, you guys probably mentioned it on here before, but the 30secondsofcode.org site, if you're not familiar with it, it takes little snippets of weird JavaScript code, like today converts numbers to an array of digits. And it's a little snippet of code. It kind of explains how it works. It's usually complex code, and gives you examples. And it's just a neat place to go check out some kind of weird JavaScript thing to kind of stretch your knowledge or something you haven't seen before. And you can dive into all of them and dig into arrays or a specific area. But I just kind of like going there on the daily pick and just kind of seeing, hey, do I know how to do this? How to map this array to a digit and all these kind of different things that they do. So it's a neat little daily exercise to keep you sharp.
Very cool. What's the name of that again?
It's 30secondsofcode.org. The 30 is the numbers, 30secondsofcode.org.
Excellent. We'll have that in the show notes as well. And then +1, of course, on Chain React Conference on July 11th and 13th. We'll be in Portland in July, all of us having Portlandian beer and talking about React Native code, of course. And last but not least, Vincent, our guest, do you have any picks?
Yeah, sort of going along with the talk theme, I am going to be speaking at React Day Berlin in November, and they still have their CFP open like until August 17th, I think. So if you want to just attend and meet me, talk React Native DOM, grab a ticket. If you want to speak alongside me, submit a CFP, all things React, React Native, what have you. It should be a really fun time.
That's awesome. And you are located in, you work in Boston, is that right?
Yes.
So you'll be doing the long fly on over to Berlin. Is this your first time? Well, you did earlier, the one in Paris.
Yes.
Is this your first time in Berlin?
Yes, this will be my first time in Germany. So that's exciting.
Awesome. So anybody listening to this podcast speaks German, feel free to help out.
Yeah, definitely, please.
Awesome. All right. I think that's all we've got here. So passing it on back to you, Mr. Pikarczyk.
Vincent, thank you so much for coming on React Native Radio. We really appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. We're all super excited about React Native DOM and even the 808 synthesizer that you've created. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, that concludes our episode with Vincent Riemer of React Native Radio.